Reuben Marsh counted the gas in his tank in dollars, not gallons. 3.25. Enough to finish the night's deliveries if he didn't run the heater. So he didn't run the heater. He drove with his collar up and his breath fogging the windshield, and he told himself the cold was good for staying awake. There was a notice taped to his apartment door that morning. Eviction. The landlord had used a strip of gray duct tape to hang it, because he wouldn't spring for a thumbtack. Reuben had peeled it off before his daughter woke. He'd folded it small and put it in the glove box, down under the napkins and the spare fuses, so Nella wouldn't see it. A man learns to hide things at the level of a 7-year-old's eyes. That same night, the app docked him $18. Late drop, it said. It was late because he'd stopped on the shoulder to help a stranded car. A woman with her hazards blinking and a phone with no bars. He'd given her a jump and waited till her engine caught. $18. Gone for 8 minutes of being a person. And a 5-star customer wrote one line that the app pinned to the very top of his profile, where every future rider would see it first. Drivers like this are why the service is going downhill. 47 ratings on that profile. And that was the one they showed the world. Then, near the end, a quiet man in a gray coat climbed into his back seat, said almost nothing, and when he got out 3 blocks later, Reuben felt the weight shift on the seat behind him. A scuffed canvas bag, still there, left behind. He looked down at it under the streetlight. If you believe kindness never goes unnoticed, that somewhere, someone is keeping count even when you're sure no one is, then this story is for you. Stay with me. It goes further than you think. And before we go on, do me a small thing. Subscribe so you don't lose the rest of this. And in the comments, tell me the city you're watching from. I want to see how far Reuben's story travels tonight. Every name on that list is a person who still believes a good act lands somewhere. Now, let's go back to the beginning of that night and take it slow. Rennick doesn't look like much after midnight. It's a working town stitched to the edge of Columbus, all vinyl siding and chain link and porch lights that click on when a cat crosses a yard. Reuben knew it by its porches. He delivered to most of them. He knew which houses had the motion lights so he wouldn't trip on the steps, and which ones had the loose brick by the mailbox, and which dog would bark, and which would just watch. You learn a place with your feet when you do this long enough. You learn it the way a mailman does, or a man walking off a debt. The app pinged. A pickup. Chinese takeout on Halstead, drop on Vine. He said the addresses out loud to himself, the way he always did, because saying them made them real, and kept his mind from drifting to the glove box. His phone was propped in the cup holder, and on the line, small and far away, was Nella. "Are you almost done, Daddy?" "Getting there, baby. You should be asleep." Mrs. Adeyemi fell asleep on the couch. Mrs. Adeyemi from down the hall watched Nella on the nights he drove. She was 70 and kind, and she charged him nothing, which was its own kind of debt he could never seem to pay. "Then you be quiet and let her sleep," he said. "You brush your teeth?" "Yeah, both rows." A pause. The kind of pause that meant no. He smiled in the dark. "Go do the back ones. I can hear it when you skip 'em." She giggled. Then softer, in the voice she used when she'd been thinking too long in the dark, "Daddy, are we gonna move again?" He didn't answer right away. He watched a stoplight turn green over an empty intersection and let the car roll through it. "No," he said. "We're not moving." He said it the way you say a thing you want to be true. She was too young to hear the difference. He hoped she was too young, and he hated that hoping was the best he could do for her. "Okay," she said, and yawned, and he could hear her believing him, which was worse than anything. "Say it," he said. "Good night, I love you, drive careful," she recited, all one word, their words, every night. "Good night, I love you. I'll be there when you wake up." He always was. He'd made sure of that once, at a cost, and he'd never once broken it since. He picked up the takeout. The bags were warm and smelled like ginger, and he was so hungry his stomach turned over on itself. But that food was somebody else's dinner, and he was only the hands that carried it. He set it careful on the passenger seat so it wouldn't tip. He drove it to Vine. He walked it up a dark path, motion light, he remembered, and it clicked on right on cue. And he set it on the mat and stepped back and knocked and went, because that was the way they wanted it now. No faces, just food on a mat and a photo to prove it. $3 and change for that run. He watched the number tick into his account, and it was already spent. It was spent before he earned it. That was the arithmetic of his life. Every dollar arrived, already owed to someone. Here's the thing about Reuben Marsh that you have to understand, or none of the rest will land right. He had not always been this tired. There'd been a few years back, when a warehouse off Route 9 had offered him a floor lead job. Salary, benefits, a door with his name slid into a little metal frame. He was good with people, and good with a clipboard, and they'd picked him out of 40 men, and he'd turned it down. Because that same month the doctors had used the word they use, the quiet word, about his wife. Marguerite and the floor lead job meant nights and weekends and travel to the other yard, and it meant he would not be in the room. So he stayed a day shift nobody, so he could be in the room. He was in the room at the end. He held her hand, and he was there when she wasn't anymore. And he has never once, not for 1 second, regretted the being there. But the world doesn't reward you for the being there. The world moved on and gave the door to somebody else. And somehow, after that, every ladder he reached for had the bottom rung missing. He'd started to believe something he'd never say out loud to Nella. That decency was a dead end. That being a good man had cost him every good thing, one at a time, and would keep costing him. He carried that belief around like a stone in his coat. It made him gentle, and it made him bitter both at once. And if you've ever been the person who does the right thing and watches the wrong people win, you know exactly the weight of that stone. He kept driving. The runs thinned out the way they do past 1 in the morning. He parked under a burnt-out sign and rubbed his hands together and did not turn on the heater, and he watched the app for the next ping, and he thought about 9 days. Because that was the number on the notice in the glove box. 9 days and $3,850. That was what stood between his daughter and another move, another school, another set of strangers' porches to learn by feel. The morning it went up, he'd caught the landlord in the stairwell. Craig Petzel, a soft, round man who wore golf shirts in a town with no golf, and who talked to his tenants like they were an expense he was tired of carrying. Reuben had asked him, not begged. He'd promised himself he wouldn't beg. Asked him for 2 more weeks. Said he was good for it. Said he'd never once been the kind of tenant you had trouble with. And that was true. And Petzel knew it was true. Petzel had looked at him with something that was almost sympathy, and was actually just impatience wearing sympathy's coat. Marsh, he'd said, I hear you. I do. But sentiment doesn't pay the water bill. He'd said it like it was wisdom, like he'd read it somewhere and been proud to remember it. 9 days. That's more than I have to give you. And he'd gone up the stairs in his soft shoes, and Reuben had stood there in the cold stairwell with the taste of it in his mouth. That a man could turn your whole life into a line about a water bill and feel clever doing it. So, 9 days. The app pinged. It was a strange little fare. That first one with the man in the gray coat, though Reuben didn't know yet that it was strange. Older gentleman, standing on a corner near the shuttered 5 and dime like he'd been standing there a while and didn't mind. He wore a gray wool coat that had been good once, and was worn now at the cuffs, and under it plain clothes, and shoes that Reuben, tired as he was, half noticed, worn on top, but with a sole that looked heavier and better made than the shoe deserved. A small thing. He forgot it as soon as he saw it. The man got in the back and gave an address on the far side of the tracks. Soft-spoken. Unhurried, he looked out the window the whole way, like a man watching a movie of a place he used to live. At the end, he paid in the app, and he tipped. Not big, not small. Exact. The kind of tip that told you the man had done math and landed on fair. And as he opened the door to go, he said, "Thank you, Reuben." "You bet," Reuben said. "Take care now." And it was only 2 streets later that it caught up with him, and even then only halfway, a splinter that didn't quite draw blood. The app showed the driver's first name to the rider. That was normal. But the man had said it the way you say a name you already knew, not read off a screen. Known, like he'd come looking and found the right car. Reuben let it go. You meet 1,000 people doing this. Half of them are odd. He had 9 days and a low tank and no room in his head for a polite old man who knew how to say thank you. He should have kept the splinter. But nobody keeps the splinter. That's the whole trick of it. The important thing always looks small the first time it touches you. The next night was worse, and the worst of it happened where everyone could see. It was a busy restaurant, a chain place off the highway with a pickup lobby that got jammed at dinner rush with drivers. They stood around holding their phones, waiting for numbers to come up on a screen. A little crowd of tired men and women, all doing the same low-paid thing, and mostly too worn out to talk. Reuben was among them, waiting on an order for a drop across town, and he was doing the thing he did, keeping to himself, watching the counter. There was a younger driver there, loud, the kind who narrated his own night to anybody near enough to hear, who thought being 25 and quick with his phone made him something. He was scrolling, and he found Reuben's profile. Reuben never did figure out how. Maybe they'd been assigned the same restaurant. Maybe he was just poking at the leaderboard. And he found the pinned review. And he read it out loud to the whole lobby. In a snickering little announcer's voice. "Drivers like this," he read, "are why the service is going downhill." Oh, that's cold. That's pinned, man. That's on top of your whole profile. He looked up, grinning, looking for the laugh. "That's rough, my guy. 47 ratings and that's your headline?" A couple of people looked over. Somebody let out a breath that might have been a laugh, and might have been just tired. The host behind the counter glanced up and then looked back down at her screen, the way you do when you don't want to be part of something. Reuben felt his face go hot, and then very still. He felt his hands begin to shake, the small, betraying shake of a body that's had enough, and he put them in his coat pockets so nobody would see. He wanted to explain. He wanted to say, "That review was the woman on the shoulder. That was 8 minutes of jumping a stranger's dead battery. The drop was late because I stopped to help somebody. That's the whole crime." But you can't explain a pinned review to a snickering kid in a lobby. There's no counter for it. The app gives the customer the last word and pins it to your chest. So he didn't explain. He stood there and took it and let it be the loudest, most public wrong thing that had happened to him in a year. A man judged, out loud, in front of a room, for the one thing he'd done right that week. His number came up. He stepped to the counter and took the warm bag. And the host, young, embarrassed for him, not meeting his eyes, mumbled something. And Reuben looked at her and made himself steady and said, quietly, "Thank you. Have a good night." He said it, and he meant it. That was the part the kid would never understand. That saying it was the only piece of himself he still got to keep. He carried the bag out to the cold and sat in the car a minute before he started it. Just a minute. He wasn't crying. He was past crying. Most nights. He was just letting the shake finish moving through his hands so he could hold the wheel. His phone lit up, a text from Mrs. Adeyemi, who was old and typed slow and used no punctuation. "Nella using her inhaler more. The counter is getting low. She said not to tell you, but I am telling you." He closed his eyes. The inhaler. Nella's lungs had been narrow since she was a baby, and when the weather turned or she ran too hard at recess, she'd get that whistle in her chest, that small, terrible sound, and reach for the little canister with the dose counter on the side. And the counter was a number too. Everything in his life had become a number ticking toward zero. The gas, the days, the rent, and now the doses. He drove the food to its door. He set it on the mat. He knocked and stepped back. And on the way home, he did the math he did every night. And there was no version of the math where all the numbers stayed above zero at once. He looked in on her when he got home. She was asleep with her mouth open and one arm flung off the bed. And the inhaler was on the nightstand where she could reach it, and he picked it up and turned it and read the counter in the light from the hall. Low, not empty. Low, enough for a while if her chest stayed quiet. He set it back exactly where it had been so she'd find it in the dark without waking all the way. Then he stood in the doorway a long time, the way parents do, watching a sleeping child breathe and counting the breaths like they were money. The days after that came fast and mean. The app sent him a notice of its own. Not taped to a door, worse in a way, because it was cheerful. A little banner, orange, friendly font. We've noticed some reliability concerns on your account. That was the word they used. Reliability, as if the man who'd never missed a shift, never no-showed a pickup, never once been late that wasn't him stopping to help somebody, was the unreliable one. The banner explained, in the same pleasant voice, that another flag could result in deactivation, which was their clean word for cutting off his only income. One more ding. One more customer in a mood. One more 8 minutes of decency at the wrong time. And the whole thing switched off like a lamp. So he drove more. He took the runs nobody wanted, the 3 a.m. ones, the far ones, the ones out past the highway where the streetlights gave out and the app's map showed nothing but gray. He slept in pieces. He got Nella to school on no sleep and made his voice bright at the breakfast table and let her tell him about a field trip her class was taking to the science center, $22, permission slip due Friday. And he said, "We'll see, baby," which she had learned by now meant no. And she'd stopped arguing about the "we'll sees," which broke his heart worse than the arguing ever had. And through those bad nights, the man in the gray coat came back. Not every night, but enough that Reuben started to notice him the way you notice a face in a crowd you've seen before and can't place. Twice more that week, standing on a corner, unhurried, in that worn good coat, getting in the back, watching the town go by like a movie, and the small things stacked up, the way small things do when you finally start paying attention. The shoes again, those heavy, better than they look soles under the plain worn uppers. And once, dropping the man near an empty lot by the tracks, Reuben had seen it, a black sedan, clean, expensive, parked down the block with its lights off. And when the gray coat man got out, the sedan didn't move, but Reuben would have sworn it was there for him. Waiting, watching where the old man went. He told himself he was tired and seeing patterns in nothing. That's what tired men tell themselves. Then, on the last of those nights, the man asked him something. They were stopped at a light, and the town was dead quiet around them. And the man in the back seat said, out of nowhere, in that soft, even voice, "Let me ask you something, Reuben. What would you do if you found something that wasn't yours?" Reuben caught his eyes in the mirror, pale eyes, patient, giving nothing away. It was a strange thing to ask a stranger at 2 a.m, but Reuben was too tired to be careful, and the answer was just there, already formed the way true things are. "Find who it belongs to," he said. The light turned green. He drove through it. "Isn't that the whole question?" The man in the back said nothing, but in the mirror, for just a second, something moved across that patient face. Not a smile. Something quieter and older than a smile. The look of a man who has asked a question 40 times and heard the wrong answer 39. Reuben didn't see it. He was watching the road. He dropped the man at the same dark corner by the tracks, and the man said, "Thank you, Reuben," in that knowing way, and got out. And Reuben drove home and forgot the whole exchange by the time he climbed the stairs, because forgetting was how he made room to keep going. You already know he shouldn't have forgotten. You're keeping the splinter for him now. Hold on to it. The night it happened, the real night, was the worst one yet, and it had no business being special. That's the part Reuben would think about later. That grace doesn't announce itself. It shows up looking exactly like one more bad shift. He'd been driving since 10. The tank was low again. The dollars not gallons math. 3 1/4. Enough to finish if he didn't run the heater, so he didn't run the heater. His hands were stiff. His eyes had that grit in them. Nella had a cough starting, just a small one, but he'd heard it over the phone earlier, and he'd been listening to it in his head all night the way you listen for a smoke alarm. 7 days left on the notice now, not 9. 7, he'd counted them wrong once out of hope, and then counted them right. The last fare of the night pinged near the shuttered 5 and dime. He almost declined it. He was empty, he was cold, he wanted his own bad bed. But declining was a flag, and a flag was deactivation, so he swiped accept and drove to the corner. And there, of course it was him, stood the man in the gray coat. He looked tired that night, more tired than usual. Older, somehow, like the cold had gotten into him. He got in slow, and he settled into the back with a small sound, and he gave a short address across the tracks. And then he was quiet, in a way that felt final, like a man at the end of a long errand. They drove. The town slid by. Reuben watched him once in the mirror, and the old man's eyes were closed, not asleep, just resting. And Reuben let him be. At the address, a dark gated drive, hedges, a private kind of dark that Reuben's part of Rennick didn't have. The man paid in the app, and tipped his exact fare tip, and said, "Thank you, Reuben," and got out, slow, and shut the door soft, and walked away up the dark drive without looking back, a gray shape swallowed by hedges. Reuben pulled off, made the turn, drove 3 blocks toward the on-ramp home, and felt the weight shift on the seat behind him. He knew that feeling. Every driver knows it. Something sliding when you take a corner, something that shouldn't be there. He glanced in the mirror and saw nothing on the seat. And then he reached back with one hand at the next stop, and his fingers found canvas. He pulled it up into the front. A bag. A scuffed canvas bag, soft with age. The kind of thing a man carries for 30 years because it still holds. The gray coat man's bag, left behind on the seat like it was nothing. Reuben's first thought was the tired man's thought. Return it tomorrow. Turn it in. Not my problem tonight. His second thought was that it was heavy. Heavier than a coat. Heavier than papers. Dense in a way that made his tired mind go quiet and alert at the same time. He pulled the car to the curb under a sodium streetlight, the orange kind that makes everything look like an old photograph. And he sat there a second with the bag in his lap. He shouldn't open it. You don't open what isn't yours. But you have to know what you're carrying, don't you, when it's this heavy and it isn't yours. He worked the zipper. It was stiff, and then it gave. And the streetlight came down orange through the windshield onto what was inside, and Reuben Marsh stopped breathing. Cash, banded stacks of it. Not loose bills, not a wad, banded, the way a bank bands it, thick straps of hundreds packed down into the bottom of that soft old bag. More money than he had ever held, more than he had ever seen outside of a screen, sitting in his lap under a streetlight on the worst night of the worst week of a year of bad weeks. His hands were shaking again. But not the lobby shake. A different one. He took out one band and counted it because his mind needed something to do that wasn't panic, and it was 1,000. He set it on the passenger seat. He took the next. 1,000. He counted them out one at a time onto the seat beside him in the orange light, his breath loud in the cold car. 10 straps, $10,000, laid out in a row where a warm takeout bag usually sat. $10,000. 7 days. 3,850 owed. An inhaler counting down. A field trip he couldn't cover. A tank he measured in quarters. And 10,000 untraceable dollars left by a stranger, sitting in his lap on a dark street, with not one soul in the world who knew it was there. And there was one more thing in the bag, tucked in the side pocket, apart from the money, folded and refolded so many times the creases had gone soft and white. A small paper. He drew it out with 2 fingers. A bus transfer ticket. Old. Decades old. By the look of it, the ink faded. The paper water stained and brown at one edge, like it had once been soaked and dried and kept anyway. A 5-cent transfer from a city bus line that Reuben was fairly sure didn't run anymore. Worthless? A scrap. And it had been tucked into the side pocket of a bag, holding $10,000. Tucked in careful, apart, like it was the thing in that bag that actually mattered. Like the money was just money. And this was the treasure. Reuben sat there and looked at the little water-stained ticket in his shaking hand, and then at the 10 straps of cash laid out in a row, and then out through the orange-lit windshield at the empty street. And the story leaned in close and dared him to do the math. He could pay the rent. He could pay it twice. He could buy Nella's inhaler refills for a year, cover the field trip, put gas in the tank by the gallon instead of counting it out like medicine, and still have enough left over to breathe, actually breathe, for the first time since the hospital bills started arriving in that terrible courteous envelope style that means the number inside is going to hurt you. He ran the math. The math was not complicated. And then he picked up the 10 straps of cash one by one and put them back in the bag. He didn't decide it exactly. That's not how it felt. It felt more like recognizing something. The way you recognize a wrong turn, not from a sign, but from the way the road stops looking like the road you know. He had held his wife's hand in a hospital room for 11 months and never once wished he hadn't given up the warehouse promotion to do it. He had helped a stranded driver in the rain and gotten docked $18 and a 1-star review for his trouble. He had said have a good night to a lobby full of people who were laughing at him. He had folded an eviction notice into his glove box so his daughter wouldn't see it. He was not a man who was unfamiliar with the cost of doing the right thing. He zipped the bag. He pulled away from the curb and made the turn back toward the address. The gate was dark, the kind of dark that means the people inside have chosen it. He idled at the intercom for a moment and got nothing. No crackle, no voice, and he was almost relieved until he caught movement in his mirrors. The gray coat man was walking away down the sidewalk, alone, at this hour, heading away from the gate, and Reuben didn't think. He put the car in park on the empty street and got out. 3 blocks. The cold hit him across the face like a reprimand. His good shoes slapped the wet pavement, and his breath came out in ragged white clouds, the bag over one shoulder. And he was aware of how he must have looked, a man running at an old man in the dark, and he called out before the thought finished. "Sir," the gray coat man stopped. Reuben caught up to him, breathing hard, and held out the bag. "You left this in my car. It's all here. I counted it, so you'd know it's all here." The man looked at him for a moment that seemed longer than it was. Then he reached into his coat pocket and produced a fold of bills, a thank you, a tip, the normal transaction, and held it out. Reuben shook his head. No, he was still catching his breath. Then it wouldn't be returning it, would it? He set the bag down between them on the sidewalk. He nodded once. He turned and walked back to his car, 3 blocks, and he didn't look back. And the cold felt exactly the same as it had felt on the way there. And he drove home to his daughter and his eviction clock, having gained nothing at all. Behind him, on the empty sidewalk, the gray coat man stood and watched the taillights diminish. And then, for the first time in 2 years of this, he took out his phone. The drive home was quiet in a way that pressed on him. He kept both hands on the wheel. He kept the heater off out of habit, even though the night was done and the gas didn't matter anymore. And the cold came up through the floor and settled in his good shoes, still wet from the pavement. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't check the app. He drove the long way, past the shut gas station in the tracks. And he tried to feel like a man who had done the right thing, and mostly he felt like a man who had just handed away his daughters next year. $10,000. He had held it in his two hands. He had counted it under a streetlight, 10 banded stacks, 1,000 in each, and he had put every strap back and run 3 blocks in the dark to give it to a stranger who was already walking away. He did not let himself do the math again. He had done it once, and once was enough, and if he did it twice, he was afraid of what the second answer would be. The apartment was dark, except for the lamp Mrs. Adeyemi always left on. She was asleep in the chair with her Bible open on her knee, 70 years old and still sitting up for him, because she would not take a dime to watch Nella, and this was the only way she'd let him thank her. He touched her shoulder. She woke the way old women wake, all at once, already smiling. She went down easy, she whispered. Use the inhaler once. I marked it on the counter for you. He walked her the 3 doors to her own apartment. He came back and stood in the doorway of Nella's room. 7 years old, one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress, breathing the careful way she breathed, and the inhaler on the nightstand with its little counter that he checked the way other men checked the locks. The number was low. He already knew the number was low. He should have felt like a good man. He sat down on the edge of her bed and he put his face in his hands, and he stayed like that a long time. She stirred. Daddy? Go back to sleep, baby. She rolled over and looked at him with one eye. Kids see everything. You look weird, she said. You look like when Mama. He made himself smile. I did something dumb tonight, he said. And also right. Both at the same time. Can it be both? Turns out it can. She thought about that with the whole seriousness of a 7-year-old. Did you get in trouble? No, he said, and then, because he had never once lied to her and wasn't going to start, I don't know yet. Maybe. Go to sleep. She went to sleep. He didn't. He sat at the kitchen table with the eviction notice out of the glove box and flat on the table in front of him. $3,850. 9 days? No, 7 now. He'd lost 2 to the running of the calendar and $22 in his account until Friday. He looked at that piece of paper until the numbers stopped meaning anything. Then, the window went gray. Then, it went pale. Then it was morning, and he hadn't slept, and there was a black sedan parked across the street from his building with its lights off. He watched it from behind the curtain. It didn't move. Nobody got out. It just sat there the way the sedan had sat down the block from the tracks the night before, and the cold thing that had been in his chest since 3 a.m. got colder, because now he was sure of it. The money had been marked. The old man had been a setup. He'd counted $10,000 in cash with his fingerprints on every band, and now there was a car outside his home, and this was how a poor man's good deed became a poor man's arrest. He got Nella her cereal. He got her dressed. He walked her down to Mrs. Adeyemi's for the school hour with his heart going the whole time, and the sedan watched him, and he made himself not look at it. At 9:40 there was a knock. He opened the door on the chain. A woman stood in the hall. Dark suit, flat shoes, a briefcase. A face you could not read at all, the kind of calm that costs money to hire. Behind her the sedan's driver waited by the stairs. Mr. Marsh, she said. My name is Dolores Okafor. I'm an attorney. May I come in? It was not a question. He almost laughed, a sick little sound, because here it was. He slid the chain and let her in and stood by the table with his hands loose at his sides so she could see them, the way you do. If this is about the money, he said, I gave it back. All of it. I counted it in front of him. 3 blocks I ran, and I gave it back, and if it was marked or if it was some kind of test to see if it was a test, she said. That stopped him. She set the briefcase on his table without being asked and clicked it open. She did not sit. She took out a single folded page and did not hand it to him yet. I've done this errand for 2 years, she said. I want to say that plainly, because I have never once had to make the visit I am making right now, and I would like to get it right. She looked at him. I represent the man whose bag you returned last night. Okay, he said carefully. His name is Halden Crane. The name meant nothing to him, and then it meant something, and he watched her watch it land. Crane. It was on the side of the trailers he passed on the interstate. It was stamped on the warehouse doors of half the routes his own app fed into. The big freight yards out past the county line. The whole invisible machine that moved the country's boxes around in the dark. Crane, Overland, the soft-spoken old man in the worn gray coat who tipped exact and knew his name before the app did. That's not possible, Reuben said. He started with one leased truck, she said, as though she were reading it off a card she had read 1,000 times. 50 years ago, he built the rest. He is 71 years old, and for the last 2 years, he has been getting into unmarked cars in an old coat. And at the end of the ride, he leaves a scuffed canvas bag on the back seat. $10,000 cash, and then he waits to see. Reuben sat down. His legs just decided it for him. 41 people kept it, Dolores Okafor said. Before you. 41. Some of them drove home fast. Some of them sat in the car and shook and kept it anyway. 2 of them turned around, saw the money, and turned back the other way. She let that sit. You are the 42nd person to find that bag. And you are the first who ran it back before he'd even reached his own gate. She reached into the briefcase again. She took out something small, and she laid it on the table between them, on the wood next to the eviction notice. It was the ticket. The old, water-stained, 5-cent bus transfer, decades gone soft at the folds. The one thing in that bag that wasn't money, and that he'd almost missed in the side pocket. He'd noticed it counting the cash. He'd thought it was trash. He'd been careful with it anyway, some instinct, and had zipped it back exactly where it was. You saw this, she said. It wasn't a question either. I thought it was nothing. It's the only thing in that bag that isn't nothing, she said. The money is a prop. This is what he's actually looking for. She almost softened. 53 years ago, Mr. Crane was a young man with nothing, in a city that wasn't kind to him, and he was 5 cents short of the fare to a job interview that was the only thing standing between him and the street. A stranger on that bus paid his transfer. 5 cents. Didn't give his name. Got off 2 stops later and never knew what he'd done. She looked at the ticket. Mr. Crane got the job. Then he got the truck. He has spent 50 years and more money than either of us can picture trying to find that man, or someone who would have done what that man did, someone who'd give with no reason to. He couldn't find him, so he built a way to test for him. Reuben looked at the ticket for a long time. He wants to give me something, he said finally. Flat, tired for passing. Yes, I don't want anything. And he heard how it sounded, and he didn't care. That's the whole point, isn't it? The second you give me something, it turns into the reason I ran. And I didn't run for a reason. I ran because he stopped. He couldn't finish it in a way that sounded like anything but what it was. Because it wasn't mine. Dolores Okafor looked at him then with something that was, on her particular unreadable face, very close to satisfaction. Mr. Marsh, she said, that is precisely what I am here to write down. And that was when the pounding started on the door. Not a knock. A landlord's knock, which is a different animal. The flat of a hand, 3 times entitled to the space on the other side of the wood. Marsh, Petzel's voice. Open up, I've got men here. We're doing this the paper way now. Reuben was on his feet before he decided to be. He opened the door, and there was Craig Petzel in the hall in his zip vest with a clipboard, and behind him 2 men in work gloves, and behind them a hand truck, and the whole ugly machinery of a man being put out of his home. You've got 7 days, not 9, Petzel said, already talking. Always, already talking. Counted wrong on the notice, my mistake, the clock runs from posting not from delivery, so. He shrugged like the calendar had done it, and not him. I'm within my rights to start staging. Boxes are cheaper than a marshal. He looked past Reuben into the apartment and saw the woman in the suit, and his face did a small, greedy calculation. "This your lawyer? Save your money, sweetheart. There's nothing to argue. Sentiment doesn't pay the water bill." One of the men in gloves had already picked up a box. Nella's box. Reuben could see the corner of her nightlight sticking out of it, the plastic moon, and something in him that had held all night finally cracked, not into anger, but into a kind of terrible quiet. "Put that down," he said. "Marsh, that's my daughter's. Put it down." And Dolores Okafor, behind him, said one word into her phone, which had been open in her hand the whole time. "Now," she said, and hung up. Petzel kept talking. He was a man who filled silence the way water fills a low place. He talked about process and rights and how he'd been more than fair, 11 months of a tenant who paid late, and how a business wasn't a charity, and Reuben stopped hearing him. Because down the stairwell, slow, one hand on the rail, an old man in a gray coat was climbing toward them. No convoy, no suit, the same coat. He came up into the shabby hall light, and he stood there, catching his breath a little, 71 years old, and he looked at the box in the mover's hands, and he looked at Reuben, and he did not look at Petzel at all. Petzel looked at him, though. Petzel saw an old man in a worn coat, standing in the middle of an eviction he was trying to run, and Petzel said, "Sir, you're going to have to wait your turn. This is a legal matter. If you're here about a unit, the office is Mr. Petzel." Okafor stepped forward. She had another page ready. She always had the page ready. She held it out to him. "You'll want to read this before you finish that sentence." He took it the way you take something you're annoyed to be handed. He read the top of it. Reuben watched his face and would remember it for the rest of his life. He watched Craig Petzel read the words Crane Overland Holdings and Purchase and close this morning at 9:40. And he watched the man's mouth go on moving for a second with no sound coming out, and he watched the color leave him from the collar up. "You bought the building," Petzel said. "We bought the building," Okafor said. This morning. 9:40 this morning." Petzel turned to the old man. The whole shape of him had changed. Sir, I didn't. I manage the property I've been managing it for." "You'll go on managing it," Halden Crane said. It was the first time he'd spoken, and his voice was exactly what Reuben remembered from the back seat. Quiet, a little worn. A voice that had never in 50 years needed to be loud to be obeyed, because a man who owns the road doesn't have to yell at the traffic. "You'll go on managing it," Crane said again, "and you'll honor every lease in this building at the rent that's printed on it. Every one. Including his." He nodded, once, at Reuben's door. "The notice is void. Tear it up. And you'll put that box down, and you'll put it back exactly where the child had it. And you'll do it yourself, with your own hands, before you leave this floor." He didn't raise his voice. That was the thing Reuben kept coming back to. There was no gloat in it, no relish. He said it the way you'd tell a man he'd left his headlights on. And Craig Petzel, who had duct-taped an eviction to a door because he wouldn't spend a nickel on a thumbtack, got down on one knee in the hallway and lifted a 7-year-old's box and carried it back inside, and set it down, and adjusted it, and did not say one more word. Then it was just the four of them, and the movers gone, and the old man standing in the little apartment looking at the flat eviction notice on the kitchen table next to his own 53-year-old ticket, the two pieces of paper side by side, a man's whole life measured out in what other people had decided he was worth. "May I sit?" Crane said. "Yeah," Reuben said. "Yeah, of course, I'm sorry, sit, don't." Crane lowered himself into the kitchen chair with the care of an old body. He looked around the apartment, the marked-off inhaler count on the counter, the one lamp, the child's drawings taped to the fridge. He looked at it the way a man looks at a place he recognizes from a long time ago. "I had a room like this," he said. "Smaller. For a lot of years I told myself I'd forgotten it. I hadn't." He put a hand flat on the table beside the ticket. "You know what I was afraid of, running this fool's errand for 2 years? I was afraid the answer was that there wasn't anyone. that I'd built the whole thing on a 5-cent kindness that couldn't happen anymore. 41 people took the money, Mr. Marsh. After the 20th, I stopped being sad about it. That's the part that frightened me. I stopped being surprised. Anybody would have taken it, Reuben said. You don't know what I had going on. You almost did the math, Crane said. Reuben went still. I know you did. I could see it. Under the streetlight, I watched you sit there longer than any of them. That's how I knew, when you turned the car around, that it was real. It doesn't count for much when a man gives away what he doesn't need. The old man's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. You needed it. You needed it more than any of the 41. And you ran 3 blocks in the cold to give it back to an old man who'd already turned his back on you. Son, that's not a man passing a test. That's the test being over. Reuben didn't trust his voice, so he didn't use it. I'm not going to hand you a check, Crane said. I thought about it. I could void your rent for life and it'd be a rounding error on a Tuesday, and you'd let me, because of her. He nodded toward the child's room. And in a year you'd hate it, and you'd hate me, because a gift that big turns a man into a story about a lucky day. I don't want to make you lucky. Luck runs out. He leaned forward. I run a company that turned you into a number. 47 ratings and 1 bad line pinned to the top of your name, written by somebody who never met you. And a machine that docked you $18 for stopping to help a stranger on the side of the road. That machine is mine. I built the road, and I let other people build the machine that runs on it. And somewhere in there, it started grinding up men like you and calling it efficiency. He said the word like it tasted bad. I want you to come fix the part of it that touches the drivers. A real job. A salary. A desk with your name on it. You'd run the human side of dispatch, the part that decides whether a man like you gets a person on the phone or a robot in a strike. I don't want your gratitude. I want your judgment. You already showed me you have the only qualification I care about. I don't know how to do any of that, Reuben said. You knew how to run 3 blocks. The rest is spreadsheets. I'll teach you the spreadsheets. Reuben looked at the eviction notice. He looked at the ticket, and some stubborn, worn-down part of him, the part that had been kicked so many times it flinched at an open hand, said the thing before he could stop it. I didn't run those 3 blocks for this, he said. If I take a job out of it, then that's what I ran for. Don't you see? It ruins the only clean thing I've done in. I can't take it. The room was quiet, and Dolores Okafor, who had watched this exact fear play out in her head for 2 years and had never once gotten to see it in a person who deserved to have it, closed her briefcase with a soft click and said, dry as a bone, Mr. Marsh, he is not offering it because you ran. He is offering it because of the 20 years before you ran, when nobody was watching and you did it anyway. We checked. Reuben looked at her. You think he decided in one night? She said. Mr. Crane doesn't decide anything in one night. We've been asking around about you for weeks. She almost smiled. Take the job. It isn't a reward. It's a correction. You've been underpaid your whole life, and my client is very old, and he would like to fix one wrong thing with the time he has left. Let him. Reuben Marsh put his hand over his mouth, and he nodded, because he could not talk, and the old man reached across the table and closed his own hand briefly over the younger man's wrist, once, and let go. 2 days later they met at a diner 3 blocks from Reuben's building, the one open all night, the one Reuben knew because he'd sat in it at 3 a.m. More times than he could count, nursing a coffee he couldn't afford so he'd have somewhere warm to wait for the next ping. Crane picked it. Reuben understood, later, that Crane picked everything. They took a booth in the back. And they were not alone. A woman was already there, standing when they came in, twisting the strap of her purse. Reuben didn't place her for a second, and then he did, and his mouth came open. Route 9. 6 weeks back, a woman broken down on the shoulder in the rain with her hazards going and a dead alternator, and Reuben $18 poorer for stopping because the drop went late, and he'd stayed until the tow came, because you don't leave a person alone in the dark on a highway. I didn't know how to find you to say thank you, Carol said. You wouldn't even give me your name. And then a man came asking about a driver who'd helped somebody on Route 9 6 weeks back, and I said, that's got to be him. There's not two of those. Her chin trembled. You stayed 40 minutes. In the rain. You had somewhere to be. I could tell you had somewhere to be. And you stayed. And behind the counter, a man in an apron came out wiping his hands, and Reuben knew him too. Deshaun, the night cook, the one who'd slide him a refill and pretend he hadn't. And Reuben knew what he was going to say before he said it, and dreaded it, because it was the smallest thing. This man, Deshaun said, to Crane, to the whole booth, used to come in here at 3 in the morning looking like the world had chewed him up, order the cheapest coffee we got, and leave $2 on the counter. $2 on a $1.50 coffee. Every time. I told him to stop. I said, brother, you cannot afford to tip me. I can see you cannot afford it. And he said, Deshaun laughed, but it came out wet. He said, you're up at 3 a.m. Same as me. We're the only two people awake in this whole town. Somebody ought to look out for you, too. He shook his head. Man's got nothing, and he's tipping the night cook out of pity. Who does that? Nobody, Crane said quietly. That's rather the point. Reuben sat in the booth with the woman from the highway and the cook from 3 a.m., and he understood, finally, all the way down, that he had not been discovered on one lucky night. He had been seen. For weeks. For a lifetime, maybe, the old man across from him had gone looking backward through Reuben's whole life for the seam in it, the place where it wasn't real, the tip that was for show, or the good deed with a camera on it. And he had not found one. That was the thing that undid him, right there in the vinyl booth. Not the job. The being seen. When the others had gone and the coffee was cold, Crane took the ticket out of his coat. The 5-cent transfer. He set it on the table between them the same way Okafor had. Take this back, Reuben said. Please, that's yours. That's the whole story of your life. That little thing. I can't. Crane put his hand over the ticket. Then he slid it the rest of the way across the table, under his palm, until it was in front of Reuben, and he took his hand away. For 53 years this has meant a debt I couldn't pay, he said. I've carried it like a stone. A man did something for me that I could never give back, because I couldn't find him, and a debt you can't pay eats you. He looked at the soft old paper. You paid it. Not to me. You can't pay a thing forward and backward at the same time, so don't try to argue it. But last night you did the exact thing that stranger did on that bus. No name, no reason, no hope of anything coming back. And for the first time in 53 years, that ticket doesn't feel like something I owe. It feels like something that came true. He closed Reuben's fingers over it, both of the old man's hands around the younger one's fist, the way you'd warm somebody's hand in the cold. Keep it. You're the reason it finally means what it was always supposed to mean. That's not a gift. You can't give a man back his own answer. Reuben kept it. The world was watching all along. That's the part nobody tells you, sitting alone in a cold car, counting your gas in dollars. You think the whole point of being good when it costs you is that no one sees. That it disappears into the dark the second you do it, that a man can spend his entire life being decent in rooms with no one in them and get nothing for it but the being decent. And most of the time that's true. Most of the time there is no old man in a gray coat. That's what makes it worth anything at all. But every so often, somebody is keeping the ledger. Every so often the kindness you thought fell into the dark was landing in a hand you couldn't see. 6 months later, the light came into a kitchen that was theirs. Not the same apartment, a small house now, on a street with trees, 3 blocks from a school with a nurse who kept a spare inhaler in her office with Nella's name taped to it. The inhaler on the counter was full. Reuben checked it out of habit, and it was full. And it stayed full, and he had almost stopped bracing every time he looked at the little counter and read the number. He drank his coffee standing up. He liked to stand and drink it and watch the light come across the table that was theirs, that nobody could carry out in a box. Nella ate her cereal and told him a long, complicated story about a girl at school and a lost jacket, and he listened to all of it, every word, because he could, because he had the time now, because the phone on the counter was a phone and not a leash. He wore a windbreaker with Crane Overland on the chest. He had a chair. He had a name on a door and a phone that drivers called when the machine wanted to strike them for stopping to help somebody on the side of a road. And he answered it, and more often than not, he found a way. He trained the new ones himself, the nervous kids in their first week, terrified of a rating. He told them the routes and the app and the safe way to load a hatchback. And then, at the end, he told them the only thing he actually cared, whether they remembered. Someday, he'd say, somebody's going to leave something in your car. Might be a phone, might be a wallet. One time for one of you, it's going to be a whole lot more than that, and you're going to be having the worst week of your life when it happens. And you're going to do the math. He'd let that sit, the way Crane let things sit. Do the math. Then run it back anyway. Run the 3 blocks. You'll never once be sorry you did, and I can't explain to you why, so you're just going to have to trust me. Run the 3 blocks. They never understood it. The first week. They would. Craig Petzel still managed the building. That was the strange mercy of it. Crane had meant what he said, and the man kept his job, collecting the same rents on the same leases he'd once tried to break. Reuben went by sometimes to see Mrs. Adiemi, who was still there, still 70 in the way she'd be 70 forever, still leaving a lamp on for people, and once coming out with a bag of the sweet bread she made him take. Reuben passed Petzel in the lobby, and Petzel held the door, held it open and stood back and did not say anything at all. There was nothing to say. Some men lose their leverage and find out that leverage was the only thing they ever had. Reuben nodded to him and went out into the good light, and that was the last transaction they ever had, and it was fair. Halden Crane died that spring. He went the way old men who've settled their accounts get to go, quiet in his own bed, 71 years and 50 of them spent building a road across a country. Reuben was at the funeral. He stood in the back, which is where he'd have wanted to stand, and Dolores Okafor found him afterward with one last piece of paper, because she always had the page ready. It was from the will. There was a line in it about a certain artifact of no monetary value, a used bus transfer ticket, formerly the property of the deceased. And the line clarified, in the flat, legal way. So no lawyer for the estate could ever come asking that the ticket was not part of the estate, had never been part of the estate, and belonged solely and permanently to a Mr. Reuben Marsh, who was, the document said, in the old man's own inserted words, the only person the deceased had ever met who would have paid the 5 cents. Reuben keeps it in a kitchen drawer now, not framed, not on display. In the drawer, next to the spare inhaler, where the 2 things he'd never let himself lose sit side by side, the one that keeps his daughter breathing, and the one that reminds him why a man runs 3 blocks in the cold when he's got nothing and nobody's watching. Except somebody was. Somebody almost always is. It just doesn't always knock on your door the next morning. That's the part I need you to sit with, wherever you are, whatever cold car you're sitting in tonight, counting something in dollars. The knock is rare. The being watched is not. Be the kind of person the ledger would be glad to have on it, and let the reward be a thing that happens to other people, and then, once in a very long while, on the worst night of somebody's life, it won't be. If this story reached you, comment the city you're watching from. I'd like to see how far Reuben's 3 blocks have traveled.